My sister barred my husband from attending her wedding. We went anyway, and her fiance publicly pushed him, then spread falsehoods online. My sister and I have always had a rocky relationship. We loved each other deeply, but we weren't the kind to share every thought or confidence. We'd had our share of arguments, sure, but they were typically over small issues or differing views on family duties. Overall, I cherished her. I was proud of her successes, stood by her, and had been there for every major moment in her life until this wedding fiasco. We had a strong bond until this mess unfolded. I've been married to Dan for 4 years, and he meshes well with our family. Dan was the sort who went out of his way to bond with those I held dear, and I valued that. Having no siblings of his own, he treated my sister like one, and they had a playful rapport that felt like sibling banter. They were always joking around, and he was there for her whenever she needed support. She'd been struggling with a business idea for about a year, aiming to launch a small online jewelry shop. Dan gave her a no-interest loan to kickstart it, a hefty amount, and I was thrilled he was willing to back her. So, when her wedding invite arrived with a strange note requesting I leave Dan at home, I was completely blindsided. It stung, especially given their closeness. I reread the note multiple times, wondering if it was a gag or if I'd missed some subtext. Dan brushed it off initially, thinking she was setting up a wedding jest, but something felt off to me. I tried texting her with light questions about the event, but her replies were evasive, claiming she was swamped with planning and would call later. Unable to get a straight answer, I rang my mom. When I asked if she knew why Dan wasn't invited, she chuckled and said, "Oh, you know your sister's quirks. She's just being goofy." She thought my sister was cooking up a funny bit for the reception. Her dismissive attitude didn't help and only deepened my confusion. Since Mom didn't take it seriously, I figured it was a harmless stunt. Still unsure, I couldn't see how bringing Dan would cause any real harm. After all, it was a wedding, a joyful celebration meant for family unity, not odd restrictions or head games. We arrived at the venue together. Right away, some guests shot us odd glances. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the day's happiness. I figured they were just noticing us because Dan and I had dressed more formally than usual to honor the occasion. Then I spotted my sister. She was chatting with her bridesmaids, but when she saw Dan, her face changed. Her expression sank, then twisted into raw anger. She marched over, her voice quaking with fury, demanding why Dan was there. She didn't bother to keep it quiet. Everyone nearby could hear the edge in her tone. The air grew tense, and I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I tried to pull her aside for a private talk, but she insisted Dan wasn't welcome and that I was defying her wishes. To calm her, I pointed out that the note seemed like a joke, and even Mom thought so. I urged her to breathe and explain the real issue. But she didn't answer directly. Instead, she shouted louder, accusing me of trying to ruin her day. Her fiance heard the commotion and rushed over. I hoped he'd defuse the situation. Instead, he instantly backed her, standing protectively beside her and glaring at Dan. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and shoved Dan hard, ordering him to leave. I was stunned. The situation had spiraled far beyond what I'd imagined, and I was torn between defending my husband and preserving what little family harmony remained. But by then, it was too far gone. Heart heavy, I took Dan's hand, and we left. That night, I was in shock. Dan was silent, but I could tell he was hurt. He hadn't meant to cause a scene or upset anyone. We genuinely thought we weren't breaking any rules. Later, I tried calling my mom and sister, hoping to sort things out and apologize for whatever unspoken line we'd crossed. No one answered. 2 days later, Dan showed me his phone, pointing to a post by my sister's new husband. It was a long, venomous rant about vile people trying to sabotage their day, implying some were obsessed with him and his wife. He didn't name us, but it was obvious who he meant. Seeing it laid out publicly felt like a betrayal. This man, who should have embraced family, was openly accusing us of something sinister just for showing up. It was humiliating and painful, leaving me powerless. I tried reaching out to my sister and mom again, hoping the wedding stress had faded and they'd be open to talking. But my calls went unanswered. All I wanted was to understand what I'd done wrong. Was I at fault for assuming Dan would be welcome? Should I have taken that note seriously, no matter how absurd it seemed? I thought I was honoring her by attending her big day. Yet everything I'd done had backfired. I confided in a few close friends, and they were as baffled as I was. They couldn't fathom why my sister and her husband reacted so fiercely. Then one friend suggested something I hadn't considered. Her husband might be envious of Dan's bond with her, or feel threatened by him. It didn't fully add up, but it was the only theory that made sense. Since that post, I've heard nothing from my sister or her husband. My family seems split, with some relatives reaching out to express sympathy while staying neutral. It's painful to know my family was dragged into this because I didn't take the note seriously. Now, I'm second-guessing every choice and conversation, wondering if I should have seen the signs. The worst part is feeling like I've lost not just my sister, but the sense of family togetherness. I never meant to cause drama or steal focus from her joy. Now all I have are regrets and unanswered questions. So Reddit, I'm left wondering, was I wrong to bring Dan? Did I miss a red flag I should have caught? Or was I right to think families should share each other's milestones without hidden rules and harsh reactions? I'm lost and hurt, unsure if I'll ever understand how a joyful event turned so sour. I was overwhelmed by how many of you have faced similar situations, and it's comforting to know I'm not alone. Your stories have been enlightening, helping me process this chaotic ordeal. Sadly, my family situation is far from resolved. After the wedding, there was radio silence for days. It felt eerie, and I started thinking they just needed space. Dan and I hoped they'd come around, but then our phones blew up with messages. It was like a dam broke. Texts poured in from relatives, friends, even distant acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, and they weren't kind. They called me everything from a troublemaker to a selfish brat who ruined my sister's wedding. Some messages were so harsh and bizarre I thought they were pranks. But then I realized how serious people were. One cousin texted, "If you cared about your sister, you wouldn't have pulled that stunt." Another relative accused me of trying to sabotage the wedding out of jealousy over her happiness. Her husband's social media post had sparked a wildfire. He claimed I was fixated on their relationship, fueling wild assumptions from people who didn't even ask for my side. Worse, he suggested I deliberately humiliated them by bringing Dan, despite my genuine belief it was a misunderstanding. It got so bad that Dan's family caught wind of it. They'd been on good terms with my sister and were stunned by the fallout. His mom even called my mom to clear things up, only to be told I'd made my choices and had to face the consequences. My mom's words, apparently. When Dan's mom relayed this, I was crushed. My own mother was buying into these vicious lies, believing I'd tried to overshadow my sister's day. I also noticed a strange pattern in the family messages. Everyone seemed to buy the narrative that I was obsessed with my sister's husband, trying to meddle in their life with some ulterior motive. It sounded absurd. Yet people I'd known forever seemed to believe it. And it was so painful because, as I've said, Dan was like a brother to my sister. Their bond was purely familial, nothing else. Now people were suggesting I'd used Dan to hurt her. Meanwhile, my sister hadn't reached out. She was completely ignoring me, letting her husband speak through his toxic post while our family tore me apart. Desperate, I contacted her best friend, hoping for clarity. She said she couldn't share much but mentioned my sister had been grappling with pre-wedding nerves and was heavily swayed by her fiance's views on family ties. Apparently, he has a history of possessive behavior and even clashed with some of her friends before the wedding. That tidbit sent my mind reeling. What if he was trying to isolate her, starting with me? A few days later, my worst fears were confirmed. A meddling cousin, always stirring drama, sent me a screenshot of another post by my sister's husband. This time, he went further, declaring he was relieved to be rid of certain toxic relatives, trying to manipulate his new wife. He implied Dan and I were out for revenge, and he had to protect her from our schemes. I couldn't believe it. Not only was he spreading lies, but he was painting us as lifelong troublemakers. It was mortifying and infuriating. Worst of all, people were eating it up. The drama spread to mutual friends outside the family, and I started feeling like an outcast in my own community. Despite the anger, I couldn't let it go. I needed to confront my sister and ask what she truly believed about these accusations, so I called her one last time. She didn't pick up. But hours later, I got a text from her. "You went too far. There's no coming back. I hope you're satisfied with your choices." It felt like the end of our relationship. I was shocked and heartbroken, grappling with how it all unraveled so fast. Part of me wanted to post my side online to counter these vile claims, but Dan urged me to stay quiet, warning it would only fan the flames. As much as it hurt, I knew he was right. Defending myself publicly would make me look guilty, like I had something to hide. But it wasn't just about me anymore. Dan was caught in this too. He said some of his friends, who'd seen the post, had reached out, asking why he'd stooped to causing trouble. People with no context about the note or our history had already cast him as the villain. It's hard to express how betrayed, angry, and sad I feel. My husband has been nothing but kind to my sister, yet he's being dragged through the dirt. And while I wish I could undo going to that wedding, part of me feels this was inevitable. It's clear her husband was set on isolating her, and I was just the first target. In a way, I feel I've lost not just my sister, but my entire family over one misstep that was blown out of proportion. I'm now the troublemaker, the toxic relative, the one supposedly bent on ruining others' joy, all because I showed up to celebrate my sister's wedding. Things have taken a darker turn, and after a heated talk with my mom, I'm seeing this in a disturbing new light. I visited her, determined to clear up the lies and understand why my family so readily bought these harmful rumors. She was defensive, parroting what relatives had said. I was chasing attention, causing a scene, even calling me a disruptor for meddling in my sister's new marriage. It was the same litany of accusations I'd faced for weeks. But then she said something that stopped me cold. "You should have been more careful, especially with how your husband feels about your sister." I froze. What was she implying? I pressed her to clarify what she meant by Dan's feelings. Her face didn't soften, and my stomach churned. She casually explained that my sister had grown worried about Dan's affection, a concern that intensified after her engagement. Apparently, when my sister got engaged to Trent, she told him about her bond with Dan, which we all saw as sibling-like. But Trent, as I learned through Mom's words, saw it differently. He convinced her Dan was infatuated with her and couldn't be trusted. He claimed my husband was secretly in love with her and didn't want anyone who loved his bride at their wedding. When I asked why she'd entertained such a ridiculous idea, she shrugged, saying, "Sometimes people hide their true feelings well," implying Dan had been harboring a secret passion all these years. It was laughable, but I was too furious to laugh. Trent's jealousy had twisted Dan's brotherly bond with my sister into something perverse. And it wasn't just Trent's delusion. My sister and even my mom had bought into this poison. I sat there trembling, wondering how my mom could believe Dan, who'd shown my sister nothing but kindness, had ulterior motives. She claimed she'd noticed signs she'd missed before, like when he loaned her money or helped her out. I couldn't believe simple generosity was being spun into something sordid. She didn't stop there. She revealed that when my sister first voiced her unease about Dan, she tried to shield her by distancing herself from him. Trent had warned her Dan was obsessed and would always threaten their relationship. He even pushed her to cut ties with me, claiming I was enabling Dan's supposed fixation by bringing him around. I was floored. Trent had woven a narrative where Dan and I were scheming to ruin their happiness. And it was working. I tried reasoning with my mom, explaining that none of this added up, that Dan had no reason to be in love with my sister, and we'd all been fine before Trent came along. But she wouldn't budge. She insisted Trent saw things others missed and was just protecting my sister. I left her house feeling more broken than ever. Trent's jealousy had not only wrecked my bond with my sister, but poisoned my mom too. Back home, I told Dan everything. He was speechless. He couldn't fathom how his sibling-like bond with her had been twisted into this sick story. He recalled every time he'd helped her, thinking he was just being a supportive brother-in-law, and how those memories now felt tainted. He was furious, struggling to grasp how a man he barely knew had turned my family against us with jealousy as his weapon. Later, I texted my parents, saying they could believe what they wanted, but I'd already explained my side. I made it clear I knew Dan was being falsely accused, and if there was any truth to it, I'd have confronted it first. They needed to know I wouldn't back Dan just because he's my husband. I'd never condone something so wrong if it were real. I added that these claims were absurd and deeply painful, and it said a lot about them that they sided with their new son-in-law without proof or giving us the benefit of the doubt. It's one thing to support your kids, but believing Trent's tale without evidence and turning on their own family was too much. Dan and I don't have the energy for this nonsense, and I won't let this baseless drama drag us down. I told them if they wanted to cling to this foolish story, that was their choice. But we're done with this toxic mess. For now, we're waiting to see if they'll rethink their stance or keep prioritizing this false narrative over us. I don't know what's next. Hi, everyone. Things have unexpectedly improved, though I'm still processing it all. My parents seemed rattled by my message. I think they finally saw how outlandish and unlike us these accusations were. They took it upon themselves to talk to family members about what happened. I don't know what was said, but it must have clicked how absurd Trent's claims were. Since then, I've received apologies from cousins, aunts, and uncles. Some even expressed regret for judging me without hearing my side. As much as I value their apologies, it still stings. I'm bitter about how many were quick to believe such a wild story. The idea that they thought Dan was inappropriate with someone he saw as a sister hurts. I'm glad they're coming around, but I can't pretend it doesn't leave a mark. But all that faded to the background last night when something shocking happened. My sister showed up at my door out of the blue. She looked wrecked, hair tangled, eyes swollen from crying like she hadn't slept. Despite everything, she's my sister, and seeing her like that tore at me. I let her in, hoping we could finally talk and sort things out. She broke down sobbing the moment she sat down. Once she calmed, She started explaining what happened with Trent. She said they'd had a massive fight that made her see things clearly. Through tears, she admitted Dan wasn't the first person Trent accused of being into her. Apparently, this had been going on for a while. At first, Trent's behavior seemed harmless, even oddly flattering. It started when they were out, and he'd comment on random guys supposedly eyeing her inappropriately. It felt off, but she thought he was just being protective. But it escalated. His accusations popped up everywhere, and his focus shifted to people in her life, especially Dan. When he started on Dan, he was convincing, acting like he was genuinely worried and just keeping her safe. He kept pushing it, and she trusted him enough to go along. That's why, when he demanded Dan skip the wedding, she didn't fight it. She thought she was doing right by honoring her fiance's concerns. But after the wedding, things got worse. Trent started accusing more people of wanting her, and it wasn't just casual remarks. He pushed her to quit her job, claiming a male co-worker was into her and it wasn't safe. She knew this wasn't normal. Trent was trying to strip her independence and cut people out of her life, isolating her. It wasn't just about Dan or random strangers. It was about controlling who she was and who she knew. She felt shocked, betrayed, and foolish when she realized his protectiveness was obsessive manipulation. She saw how wrong she'd been and felt ashamed for how she'd treated us. Her apology was heartfelt, and I could see her pain. She also apologized to Dan, admitting her trust in Trent had blinded her, and she'd made a terrible mistake. For the first time, I saw how deeply she regretted her actions, and I knew she meant it. She's staying with us now to get some space and figure out her next steps. I know this is a tough time for her, and it's hard to watch. But I'm also relieved the truth is out. My husband no longer carries the weight of false accusations, and my family can see Trent's behavior for what it is. Whatever happens, I'm here for my sister. I'm still taking it all in, but I'm grateful the truth has surfaced, and we can move forward. Sorry for the silence. Things have been intense and emotional. Many of you asked for an update, so here's what's happened. Last time I shared how my sister came to my house and saw Trent's controlling nature. She went back to him determined to keep her job and stand her ground. But when she told him, he lost it. He accused her of cheating, saying if she wanted to keep working, she must be into other men. His reaction was so unhinged that she left again, coming back to me in tears. It was gut-wrenching, but it seemed to give her clarity. We talked a lot that week. She realized this wasn't a relationship she wanted anymore. She made the tough call to end it and file for divorce. Trent, predictably, didn't take it well. He showed up at my house, begging and sobbing, promising to change. It was hard to watch, as he seemed genuinely remorseful. But my sister stood firm. She knew his behavior had crossed too many lines for trust to be rebuilt. So, in short, she's now navigating a divorce. It's a rough time, but I'm doing my best to support her. Dan has kept his distance, which makes sense. The ordeal has strained their bond, but he's still supportive, checking in on her because he knows she needs all the help she can get. My parents have also stepped up, helping with legal stuff and offering emotional support, which has been huge. They've also taken this chance to apologize to Dan and me, especially Dan, for ever buying Trent's accusations. It's like they finally saw how off base it all was. It's been a tough journey, but I'm thankful for the clarity. My sister is doing better despite the challenges, and my family feels closer in some ways. Thank you all for your support and kind words. They gave us strength to stand firm and trust ourselves. Thank you for being there through this. Thanks for following this crazy family saga with me. If you're into Reddit family drama, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for the next one.